never saw me. Not one of them. December 1939. Finland had 3.7 million people, and the Soviet Union had just sent 450,000 soldiers to destroy us. Tanks, aircraft, heavy artillery. All of it aimed at a nation of farmers, fishermen, and woodsmen living at the edge of the world. I was one of those farmers. I stood 5 feet tall, never married, never wanted fame. I wanted my land, my cattle, my silence. But the silence ended in November of that year. I grew up in Rautjärvi, a village so small that most maps didn't bother putting it in. My father taught me 2 things before anything else: how to survive the Finnish winter and how to shoot. Not as sport, but as necessity, because if you missed, you didn't eat. At 17, I joined the Finnish Civil Guard. We trained on weekends, shot targets, skied through the forest, and then I went home and farmed. Simple as that. But there was something others noticed in me that I could never quite explain. I could look at a point deep in the forest and know exactly how far away it was. Not roughly, but with precision down to the meter. And when I raised my rifle, I rarely missed. One day during a timed test, I fired 16 rounds at a target 150 meters away in under 60 seconds. With a bolt-action rifle and iron sights, no scope, reloading manually 3 times, while the clock was still running. The men watching me went quiet for a long moment, and I didn't understand why. To me, it was just shooting. When the war began, I was out in the field on a training exercise and didn't even know the Russians had crossed the border. I found out the next day, and the day after that, I was already at the front. Before sunrise, I was already in position. I chose my spot carefully, always the night before, studying the terrain in the dark. I packed the snow in front of me tight, then poured water over it and let it freeze solid. Because when you fire, loose snow erupts around the barrel like a white cloud that gives you away to any eye that happens to be watching. And with ice, there was no cloud at all. I kept chunks of ice in my mouth for hours, not for thirst, but so my breath wouldn't create fog in the frozen air, because at minus 40 degrees, every exhale leaves a visible trace, and traces can kill a sniper just as easily as a bullet. I never used a scope, not once, during the entire war. Most people consider that a disadvantage, but I saw it differently. A scope forces you to raise your head a few centimeters more. It catches sunlight and gives away your position before you can give away theirs. I wanted to be invisible, and invisible is exactly what I was. I lay still for hours, sometimes an entire day, waiting and watching with no hurry at all, because hurry is what kills snipers. On the Kola front, the Soviets advanced in dense formations, hundreds of men in dark gray coats, marching across white snow with no winter camouflage. And the first days were methodical. I picked my position, studied movement patterns, identified where officers stood and where patrols gathered, then waited for the right angle. One shot, reload, wait, sometimes with hours between shots. Not from hesitation, but from the demand for a perfect position, because waste was never my style. They didn't know where I was coming from, scrambling for cover, scattering, calling out for their comrades. But the next shot had already left the barrel before they could figure out the direction of the first. Sometime in December, the Soviet soldiers started calling me Belaya Smrt, the White Death. I heard it for the first time from a prisoner our men had captured, who said soldiers had been ordered to avoid certain stretches of the front line because there was something in the trees that couldn't be seen, couldn't be heard. and never missed. I didn't feel like a legend. I felt like a farmer, doing what needed to be done, but they were genuinely afraid. And that fear changed the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves, the way they fought. Fear is a weapon, and sometimes a more effective one than any rifle. They sent entire teams of elite snipers to hunt me down, their best men, with forward observers, maps, and detailed plans sweeping every sector where I had operated. I watched them arrive, and sometimes spent a full day observing a team set up before I made my move, studying how they moved, where their weaknesses were, who was careful and who was impatient. And the impatient one always moved first. When the teams failed, the Soviets called in artillery and bombed every area where I'd last been spotted, and the ground around me exploded many times, snow and earth flying, trees falling nearby. But I lay still with the ice in my mouth, waiting for the smoke to clear, and then went back to work. The reason I survived while they died wasn't luck. It was that I knew that forest better than any man in Moscow ever could. Every tree, every rise in the ground, every shadow. That forest was my home, and they were invading my home. On December 21st, 1939, I killed 25 men in a single day, and that is not a number I carry with pride, but with weight, because they were fathers and sons, men who, in another world, would have been neighbors, colleagues, strangers you pass on the street without a second glance, but who were here, armed, marching toward my land, my family, and my people. And so I did what I knew how to do. By January 1940, my confirmed count had passed 200, and by March, it would exceed 500. 542 in total, across 98 days. That number will stay with you. On the Karelia front, there were roughly 100 of us holding back an army of 5,000, 1 to 50. While the Soviet general ordered continuous artillery barrages on our positions day and night with the simple goal of breaking us before destroying us. At one point, a Soviet radio operator asked our commander, Lieutenant Utalainen, whether Kola would hold. And his answer has lived in Finnish memory ever since. Kola will hold, unless the Lord himself orders us to retreat. And he said that sitting in a rocking chair on the front line with artillery falling around him. That was the kind of man who commanded this sector, and I was the kind of man he sent into the trees. In March 1940, Soviet patience ran out and they launched a full-scale assault that wasn't positional warfare, but a wall of human bodies advancing on our lines in continuous waves. Men marching straight into our fire. I heard later that the Soviets used tank machine guns to force their own soldiers forward so that those who retreated were shot by their own side and those who advanced were shot by ours. And after watching so many men come marching to be cut down, I came to believe it was true. In those days, I put down the sniper rifle because there were too many Soviets for precision work. Picked up my submachine gun and went to the line alongside my men, and in one single day during that period, I killed 40 men. After a while, I stopped counting, because counting starts doing something to you that you don't want done. It was March 6th, 1940, in a defensive position, waiting for the next attack, when I felt something I couldn't immediately identify. I didn't hear the shot, I felt it, an explosion inside my own mouth. A blow that came from the inside out, and then my mouth was full of bone fragments and blood. It was an explosive round, banned since 1899, a war crime. But they were willing to do anything to stop the White Death. I fell, my comrades found me motionless in the snow, and placed me with the other dead until someone noticed my foot moving. They laid me face down on an evacuation sled, and that position probably saved my life because the blood drained out instead of into my lungs. I arrived at the hospital unconscious and slipped into a coma. I woke up on March 13th, 1940, 7 days after being hit, and the nurse told me I had lost most of my upper and lower jaw, that my left cheek was destroyed, and that I would need 26 surgeries over the next 14 months to rebuild my face. I asked about the war. She hesitated for a moment and then told me that on that same day, the Soviet Union had signed a peace treaty with Finland. The war had ended on the day I woke up. A few days later, I read my own obituary in the newspaper and wrote a letter to the editor to correct the mistake. I thought it was funny. I was discharged from hospital in 1941, and the Finnish government gave me a new farm because mine had fallen inside the territories ceded to the Soviet Union under the peace treaty. I received medals, a ceremonial rifle, and the largest single promotion in the history of the Finnish army, straight from Sergeant 3rd Class to 2nd Lieutenant. I accepted all of it with gratitude and then went back to farming, back to hunting, back to silence. In the decades that followed, I rarely spoke about the war, not only because of what it had done to me, but because it was the past. And the past doesn't need to be carried every day. When people asked how I had become the marksman I was, I answered with one word: practice. In 2017, 15 years after my death, my nephew found a set of notebooks I had kept for decades without showing anyone, and my personal diaries, never published, never shared, written for myself, alone. Inside, I confirmed what the military records already said: more than 500 dead, but there was something the records didn't say. In the diary, I had a name for every man I could remember. I called them my list of sins. Not achievements, not eliminated enemies. Sins. That tells you more about who I was than any statistic ever could. I died on April 1st, 2002 at 96 years old, 11 years after watching the Soviet Union disappear from the map. The country that had sent 500,000 men to kill me. I have no children and no legacy beyond what happened in those 98 days in a winter the world almost forgot. But Finland exists, and that, to me, was always enough. They never saw me. Not one of them.